Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. I'm James Baggett. I'm the founder of Car Dealer Magazine, and today we're chatting to Derren Martin from CAP HPI about the latest in October on used car prices. Derren, thank you very much for joining us as ever. I've been hearing a little bit from the dealers I've been talking to over the last few weeks that prices seem to be softening ever so slightly. Have you been seeing that when you've been doing the data?
I wouldn't say they're softened. They haven't increased by as much. And it's a lot more mixed than it was. I would say it's probably been one of the most interesting months so far this year, because over the last few months, as we've kind of all been talking about, the values have been going up. Well, it's been crazy. So, and September was particularly unbelievable, really, with the increases we saw. I think the average was £860 at 3 years, which is amazing considering how much they've gone up by previously. So this month it's I sort of use the word plateaued. It's the increases are still there. 1.2% is the average at 3 years, but it's a lot more mixed, and some have actually gone down. A lot more have stayed level, and we've seen things like values go up in the first half of October and then sort of come down a little bit. So over the course of the month, they may be up, but there's a little bit of a downward trend there for some models. So yeah, I think it's eased. I think that's actually quite good for the industry, that it's plateaued. It hasn't dropped off a cliff, and it hasn't continued to increase, because some of those increases, as we've always said, were kind of unsustainable.
Why do you think we're starting to see that softening, or that plateau, as you put it?
It's certainly not supply led. The supply levels are still low out there. The semiconductor issue is still biting hard. There are September was obviously a low registration month compared to previous Septembers. I think demand has dropped. Consumer demand has certainly dropped, but it's nothing to worry about. It normally happens at this time of year, and I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a seasonal downturn. Got a bit of sort of half term in there. Just a bit of sort of normality almost seems to have crept in, really, with what's going on. But for values to still go up, that isn't particularly normal. But because they've not increased by anywhere near as much as previously, maybe you're just seeing a sort of a normal seasonal pattern.
And so we've seen 1.2% rise in October. Just remind me what we saw in September, to just give us some comparison.
September was 5.9%. June was the biggest month, or May for June. That was 6.7, I think. But the September rise was the biggest in monetary terms that we've seen. So it's a lot calmer than that. 1.2% is equivalent to just under £150. And it's quite different by sector as well. MPVs, they continue to go up, but as we've said before, they've kind of got the room to go up, because they've not traditionally been high residual value. They've been less popular. People prefer SUVs. So they dropped by quite the most last year, and we're already coming from a lower base anyway. So they've got more room to increase. Upper medium and lower medium cars, so you sort of your Astra, Focus, Insignia, Mondeo size, they've gone up as well. SUVs not by as much, and so they've been a lot more stable. And we have seen some cars come down in those sorts in that sort of area as well. Qashqai probably has peaked and has come down, but only slightly. It's nothing dramatic. There's nothing that's really dropped off. One of the interesting things that we've seen as well is that electric vehicles have performed particularly well, and I guess they're more in the press. We've had the fuel crisis, and people seem to be considering electric vehicles a lot more, especially at that sort of 3 to 5 year age range, because they're more reasonably priced than some of the newer ones.
What sort of rises have you seen with electric cars?
Let me have a quick look. I've got the report here. If you bear with me, it's all fresh data. So just hang on 1 second. We are at 2.4% increase for electric vehicles.
So double the average, pretty much.
Yeah.
And Derren, so what's that put us at for the year then? I mean, 1.2% is still a rise. It's still quite an unusual thing to see for used cars, isn't it? What's that put us at for the year now?
So it's over 30% now. Increase for the year. So yeah, and most of all of that has come since April. So in the last 7 or 8 months, we've seen a 30% increase, and when you sort of talk about this, I talked about it in an internal meeting, and I was trying to put it into perspective for people's own vehicles. Your car has gone up by almost a third of its value on average in that time. And that's kind of the amazing thing.
I mean, for some people, it's like winning the lottery, really, isn't it? I mean, that's a massive amount of money for some people, especially when those used cars they're sat on their drives. They think they're going to depreciate. What the $1 million question is what is going to happen in the future, and how long can this go on for, Derren? I mean, we've seen it soften slightly this month. Is that going to now be the trend that we see going forward?
Yeah, I actually think that what's happened this month might stimulate a little bit of demand, because it hasn't dropped off a cliff. It hasn't continued to increase. So maybe it will mean that some of the trade will go out and buy again, because there is a bit of stability, and they realise that maybe they're not going to drop off a cliff, and you're not going to get them cheaper in 3 months' time. I think it's a good thing that it's kind of stabilised to a degree. I would expect in November probably more of the same. I think demand may continue to drop. It normally does as you run into Christmas. You've got a little bit of economic uncertainty, a few bad news stories in the press, which might affect demand to a degree. But supply levels, we speak to all the manufacturers, and I would say the only common theme, the only consistency really, is that nobody really knows when the semiconductor issue is going to be resolved, when new car supply is going to get back to normal. My personal view is that we've got it for at least the first half of next year. And that means that you're not going to get the used car supply coming in abundance for at least that period of time. So, yeah, I think we've got some stability for a while, I would say. That if values drop, no reason to panic. They've gone up by 30%. They are going to come down at some point, but I can't see it coming down in big chunks. I think it will be relatively stable, which again is good. So, yeah, I think it's a positive sign, really.
Do you think the manufacturers are going to go back to producing the oversupply of new cars that they did in the past, which has in the past fueled the used car market, or do you think they're going to see this semiconductor crisis as a bit of a change in mindset and continue to produce in this smaller build to demand way that they're doing at the moment, which will dramatically change the used car industry, won't it?
It's a difficult one to call. Certainly in the short term, it's made a big sea change. You see the registrations that are in September. Retail was more than fleet. Daily rental was almost non-existent. But there are still factories that will be kept open that need to churn out volumes as the semiconductor issue comes to an end. So it is a difficult one to call, and I'm sure if you speak to all the manufacturers, they'll be saying this is a reset and we won't be doing the expensive channels that we used to do, certainly in the volumes. Fast forward a year and who knows, it could well come back. And I think it probably will, that there will be that sort of volume coming back. It might be a little bit further forward than that, but it does tend to happen. And as I say, I can't see many plants closing really. I think they will be keeping them open, which means you've got to churn volume still. And old habits die hard, and I think it will come back at some point. But certainly some manufacturers will see it as a reset and will cut back, certainly in the short term.
And what about these used models costing more than new? I mean, with this sort of growth, you must have seen that, Derren, continue to happen in the last month. What's at the top of that list of new used cars costing more than new?
Well, the top of the list is the Dacia Sandero, and that's been top for a little while. It's obviously got a low list price, so even a higher than list used price is still quite an attractive vehicle to go out and buy for the dealers and for consumers. Really, you've still got some Porsches on there. You've got the Spider, the Macan, the Cayman. You've got a Model X on there. Toyota GT86. Is up there, which I'm kicking myself for selling mine about 18 months ago. So I definitely should have hung on to that. Mustang is there. Another Dacia Duster, Mini Cooper. They're all above list prices for their retail, and some of them probably their trade prices are above list. So a clean price above list for some of the Porsches. The Sandero trade price is 104% of the original cost new.
And what age are these cars that you're referring to?
These are 1 year with 10,000 miles on. So, yeah, year-old cars that are worth more than new ones. It's that list just grows and grows.
Derren, for people who don't understand how that can happen, just explain, just summarise that for me.
Well, obviously, normally you're not going to pay more for a car that's a year old with mileage on. When you go into a dealership, you're going to want the new one. It's brand spanking new. It's got no miles on it. When you can't get a new one, or you've got to wait 6 months for it, obviously the used one becomes a lot more attractive, and also the new price is almost irrelevant. You can't get it, so you can't get a new one. So that price is almost not a benchmark for the time being. We are sort of hearing that consumers are starting to bulk at it a little bit and saying, well, I'll wait. But I think we said this before, you've got that sort of I want it now with everything in life now. So and the thing is sort of on demand. So the used cars have become so popular because of that. But as I say, it's not necessarily a relevant benchmark when you can't get the new one.
No, it's crazy, and but I suppose it's all down to supply and demand.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, very much so. And the demand from the trade has been amazing for used cars, for consumers again for used cars, and they're available, and you can have one now. So that's the attractiveness of it.
And Derren, can we just talk in a little bit of detail about the sorts of models that have grown the most in value in the last year? I mean, you've mentioned that over the year that on average 30% used cars are up. I mean, what ones are at the top of that list, and why do you think they've grown that quickly?
So looking at sort of, I guess, true used cars, sort of a three-year-old used car over the last 12 months. Top of the list is the Citroen Space Tourer diesel. It's gone up by 50%. So I guess it's an MPV. This time last year, they weren't in demand. There was social distancing. This year, it's staycations, and I mean, it's unbelievable almost that it's a diesel vehicle in the current climate, but it's just good value previously. So it's had room to grow. The Suzuki Jimny, our old friend on there, that's always on there. That's been above list as well, and that's continues to go really well. You can't get the new one anymore. They don't build the new one as a passenger variant. What else we got on there? Skoda Yeti has gone up by nearly 4,500. Toyota Auris Hybrid, again, that dropped fairly considerably last year with the pandemic and private hire companies not being active. That's gone up by 4.5 grand as well. Peugeot Traveller, Vauxhall Cascada, cars like that. These are all going up by sort of 40%, which is thousands of pounds, 3, 4, 5, £6,000. The V class we always mentioned. So at 3 years, that's gone up by nearly £10,000. I think at 1 year, that's probably about £15,000.
I mean, did any of those really surprised you? I mean, the Citroen certainly surprises me.
Well, everything surprised me about this year, really, the increases we've seen. The Citroen Space Tourer doesn't spring to mind as being a hugely desirable vehicle that you'd pay a lot more money for. But from a consumer's point of view, if it fits the bill, it's reasonably priced even with the increases in comparison to other vehicles. They don't necessarily know what it was worth a year ago. In fact, they almost certainly don't know what it was worth a year ago. They just know what they're prepared to pay for it now, or what they have to pay for it now. And as I say, it's probably still reasonable value compared to some other cars out there.
And there must be some cars, Derren, that haven't fared quite so well. I mean, where have the biggest drops been?
Over the year, I would be surprised if there's been any drops. Over the last sort of few weeks, we have seen some cars drop in value. As I say, we've seen the Qashqai. The Qashqai's dropped. We've actually seen cars that went up in October and then have dropped since, but are still generally up. You've got like the C3, Fiesta's done that, Crossland X has done that as well. So there are cars that are sort of moving it in different directions. Peugeot 3008 and the Jaguar F-Pace have both dropped slightly in the last few weeks as well. But overall, they're all massively up from this time last year. Convertibles, sports cars, they're starting to head in a downward direction as well. Seasonality coming in there, but they've stayed strong for longer than they ever have done in the past. So there are lots of moving parts now in it more cars are staying level, more cars are dropping. And
Derren, what would your advice be to people that have got a car on PCP that might be coming towards the end of that finance agreement? Those figures they're looking at will look very different when they go into a dealership. I mean, what advice would you give to people like that?
I think they've got a great opportunity there. Obviously, the cars have appreciated probably over the last year. There's lots of opportunities there for them. Difficulty is getting a replacement for a PCP if they want a replacement. Depends if they're prepared to wait. But I think it's a really good time for a consumer in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for some people they're probably better off actually buying their car outright and selling it on the private market.
Without a doubt, that's certainly a strong likelihood that they should do that if they realise the value of it, or even sort of hang on to it for a little while now, because it will probably maintain its value for a few months as well. So yeah, certainly a different dynamic to normal there. But if they do that, that will obviously lead to less used cars coming in sort of into the trade market as well if they hang on to them. So yeah, interesting times.
Very interesting indeed. Derren, thank you very much, as always, for giving up your time. I really appreciate it and giving us an exclusive on what's been happening in October. We look forward to chatting to you again in November.
Yeah, pleasure.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. So thanks to Derren there. For more videos like this, you can log on to cardealermagazine.co.uk and click on the live tab at the top of the page. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye.